We've also got to remember as well, like everyone's got their own version, their own experience. So we're talking here about my version, your version. So people might go, well, that's bullshit. That's not what I saw. Whereas I can't account for everyone else.
Everyone's journey, isn't it?
My experience and my journey, kind of led me to what I did and how I navigated my prison service career.
Yeah. Hi there, my name is Nathan, and this is another episode of The Human Experience. And today I'm joined by my work friend and good colleague, Paul.
Hi there, how you doing, guys? Hope everyone's good.
Me and Paul, we worked together for, I don't know, I'd say probably 2-3 years, because you move
easily.
Units, don't you?
Yeah, definitely some good couple of years for sure in the prison service. So.
And
some time ago.
You joined the prison service what year?
So I left in 2014, I was there for 11 years, so 2003?
Okay.
I was there, so 11 years served in the service.
Wow, okay. So, and I was 2009, so you'd been in a few years, and I think when I came in, you was already an SO, I think.
Possibly, yeah. The timelines now get a little bit fuzzy. What feels like probably a lifetime ago, and feels like a couple of careers ago now as well. But still very clear from how fun it was, and the service as a whole. Was some fond memories.
Yeah. So just for a bit of context for those that are not aware of the prison system, we worked in HMP YOI Glen Parva. And that was a youth offenders. And originally it was a borstal. I believe it was built in the 70s. I'm going to have to fact check some of them things. But basically it housed young males that were aged 18 to 21 and 10 months.
Yep.
And it was a remand/sentenced prison. So you could get all types of people in there, because before you're convicted, you're not categorized, and therefore you could be in for any kind of crime, from petty crime to, the worst kind of crimes that you can think of, obviously. So, we dealt with some interesting characters.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we had specific remand units, that prisoners who were just on remand, potentially awaiting a sentence or awaiting walkouts. Got prisoners who were guilty unsentenced. And then we also had the prisoners who were sentenced as well. And I might be not 100% sure here, but most of the prisoners, if anything, were up to a 4-year kind of sentence period. And then normally beyond that, they would probably move into a slightly more longer term prison. So we certainly had a whole host of prisoners, and not just from a geographical perspective as well, location wise. It wasn't just kind of Leicester and the surrounding areas. It was kind of Nottingham, it was Birmingham. We had quite a heavily influenced London based prisons used to transfer prisoners to Glen Parva on a very regular basis.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which often added to the melting pot, so to speak. When you talk about that age group and gang affiliation, and then also that that kind of territorial kind of mentality then starts to kick in. So definitely that age group was very interesting, very lively.
I like the way you put that.
Very, very lively, and also I think significantly very influential, both positively and negatively influential. But you could have a huge impact on a particular individual and steer them to a good path. But then they could equally be steered onto a not so good path for influence from other prisoners. So it's definitely made it interesting.
So what I wanted to say was, I wanted to kind of relate this to the staff and for prisoners to understand where we're coming from as staff as well. So, as well as you're saying about the different geographic location of the lads, obviously I feel as well from a staff point of view, we were all from different backgrounds and different places as well, in a sense. And that's what's made it work so well, because you've got people from different experiences, different backgrounds, different cultures, different beliefs, different countries. Yeah.
And that's so important and significant, because you're then bringing in worldly wise experience, that kind of life experience from different areas, different sectors, and everyone's always learning, from one another in there as well. And I think that's what made it really unique. And, there was quite a heavy influence, from people who were in like military personnel. It was almost the go-to career once you'd left the military. It was normally during the prison service as well. So you also had that kind of influence, so when you talk about backgrounds, it's not just, kind of culture or ethnicity or where you're from. It included so many different variants. And I think that diversity was unique. I would say maybe not unique at the time, but that's what made it such a great environment to work in, because you just had a great pot of staff from different backgrounds that were able to then kind of link into one another, and it just made it absolutely fantastic. I loved, like, very fond memories.
The same.
That'll echo probably through this interview. It wasn't all kind of sunshine and roses. There's real difficult, very, very difficult times and periods within the prison service, but you kind of know what you're signing up for, and it's part of that career journey, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. So that leads me on. Let me go, like, we've said what Glen Parva is. I just want to go a little bit into your journey. So again, you said about that background. I feel with a prison officer, like, there's no thing that sets you up for it. You worked in the supermarket as a teenager, and then you maybe graduated from university, or you were in the forces. Then you become a prison officer. Like, there's no thing that kind of guides you into it necessarily. So what I want to ask you is, what made you join the prison service?
For me, back when I was considering my career options, I'd been in the fitness industry for quite a long period of time. I'd worked abroad. I'd got a little bit worldly wise experience from working in Dubai and UAE for a year.
Oh, wow.
Came back. I was working in the care assistant community for, adults and children with learning difficulties, specifically autism. And I loved that job, but it didn't pay awfully well. And I wanted a bit of stability in my life, from a career perspective. My sister was in the police. For me, it was either the police service or the prison service as an option, so I applied for both. And it was a case, the prison service came back to me first. So I was like, well, maybe that's meant to be. I went for the interviews, and I was ecstatic to be offered a position at Glen Parva as an officer. So that's how I kind of started my career. Nothing prepares you, and I think you're quite right. Nothing really truly prepares you, because it's a world within itself. In the prison, everything is behind closed doors. The police service is very much kind of open and really quite transparent. I think the prison service is very much kind of behind the closed doors, so to speak. And there's nothing untoward to that. Kind of what we do. It's just the fact that the general public aren't really fully aware of all the intricacies and everything that's involved in being a prison officer, and just how challenging emotionally, physically it can actually be, and not just like working rotational shifts and nights and days. It's you do kind of live the job. I felt like I certainly lived the job
100%
for the time, and I don't say that in a negative way either, because
you dedicated.
I didn't care being called in at 2 a.m. There's been cell damage, or there's a couple of prisoners causing issues that needed to be resolved. And he didn't mind, or staying on late after a 12.5-hour shift and saying, we've got an incident, would you mind getting kitted up? And kitted up means putting on more protective equipment to make sure we're safe, and safety for the prisoners as well. And you would stay on and do that, because you wanted to support and dedicate your colleagues, who were still there. So, which,
like you say, in a lot of other industries where I've come from, say retail, or I was in logistics, if you get told to stay on, it's like, well, why should I? Or what's the overtime I'm getting?
What's in it for me? What's in it for me? And
you didn't question it, did you? When it was
didn't question it, never challenged it. If anything, when I recall all the times, there's probably quite a few of us in the gate, and they said, oh, we need so many, let's call it 8 to stay back and, kind of get kitted up, because there's a little incident we need to resolve. There was more people putting a hand up, walking back through the gate to support than what they were wanting to leave. And that was the environment I remember from the prison service, was not everyone trying to exit as quickly as possible. It's more a case of you had more than enough people volunteering to stay on and support no matter how long it took. And I remember being there on a couple of occasions, probably close to, if not further than 24-hour stint, just because there was an incident and you know, you were there to see it through. Maybe there was Silver Command set up and what have you, and you know, kind of the incident was taking a longer turn, and you had the national teams coming in to support. But you were there, and you never questioned it. You just wanted to be part of it, of the resolution. Don't get me wrong, you didn't have all the staff who were in that same mindset and mentality, because it's impossible when you've got such a big organisation to have everyone in that same mentality and mindset. But in our time that we were there was plenty of staff, colleagues who were willing to stay.
100%. Yeah, we're going to get onto that. Sorry, you jumped me a little bit there. So you've joined because they got back to you first, rather than the police service.
And here we go. We always knew with our conversation, because we chat so much, that this was going to go down various different paths. So kind of an apology, but not that we may tail off into different directions, and Nathan was going to keep me back on track to the interview. So.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You know, what I like is a lot of the staff and people are going to relate to that, what you're saying. So you've joined. How was training? Because you said nothing sets you up for it. So this is the only insight you get, before you go to your jail.
I was at Newbold Revel, which was the one of the national training centres, and I had the time of my life at the training centre. Nothing whatsoever really preps you for when you walk in for the first day into an actual prison itself. But I loved all the kind of social aspect. Don't get me wrong, you learnt an awful lot from the training college.
Yeah,
it was really good. But a lot of it's kind of theoretical or
role play,
hypothetical kind of role play. It really doesn't, set you up. It's almost kind of mechanical to a degree. Take C&R as an example. In the perfect world, you've got a beautiful mat on the floor that's really soft that you're going to land on, and you're able to then put a prisoner's arm into a lovely triangular fixed position before going through to final lock, and the prisoner's going to be there and fully compliant. And the reality of the situation is far from that. Potentially you're on a gritty exercise yard, or you're in a cell that's slippy, or there's
cramped.
There's a million different variants. That isn't fully kind of doesn't equip you from the training college, but equally it's very difficult to replicate. We try our best. I was a use of force instructor for many years and absolutely loved it, and when we used to do the training sessions, you try and replicate really difficult situations so to make it as realistic as possible, and to make it difficult, because prisoners aren't gonna, if you've got a prisoner who's refusing to return to his cell, and the last very, very, and I will point out the very, very last step was to restrain that prisoner. It's not going to be like that. Yes, Mr. Ingram, just place me into final locks and let's walk there and let's all be happy and smiling about it. Normally they're going to want to fight to the point that they can't. And that's the bit that doesn't prep you for that. The physical exertion, whether it's 30 seconds, 2 minutes longer, that you're trying to contain and control the situation without causing injury to the prisoner, without causing injury to yourself or your colleagues, is actually. But back to the question of the training college, I personally loved it.
Nice.
I thought it was brilliant.
And was there GP staff there, Glen Parva staff there?
Yeah.
You joined with,
and there was a crew of us.
Nice.
I'd love to mention names. And this probably doesn't give it away. There was Rodders. And I'd just say that first.
Okay,
that was his nickname, and he'll know who he is, and people who would join with, and it was a special time actually. And I think I got a lot from the training, like I said, albeit doesn't fully prep you, because there's nothing like on-the-job training that you can't buy experience in the prison. So you can't buy it. Time gives you that, but you can't buy experience beforehand unless you've done a very, very similar role previously. So for me, it was a huge learning curve.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that. I'm glad you enjoyed the training, because I was the same. I didn't have a big group. I was more everyone was from different jails, so we were just departing at the end of training. But it was still nice, that kind of togetherness of joining at the same time or whatever.
And they had as well, I'm not sure if you remember, at New Bold Rebel, I think you're obviously there training at different times to myself, obviously, but they one of the proudest moments, you have like a closing out ceremony, if you remember, at the end, and you're in that auditorium, and certain people got awards for certain things, and knew very, very early on into my prison career that I loved C&R. I'd been a karate instructor previously for years and loved martial arts. I loved the kind of de-escalation. I loved the kind of being able to resolve a potentially volatile situation. All those things I just loved. So, and I can't remember the name of the C&R award that one person's awarded. But I was awarded that the C&R award from the training. And I always knew that's the track
that set you on that path.
I'd love to go down, and really intrigued me, and try and help with the conflict resolution, not just for prisoners but for other people and other staff, and teaching others to protect themselves, and at the very last cause using control and restraint or using some form of physicality to resolve a situation was always last resort. And people realise it's a very small percentage of what you do is having to restrain somebody. 99% of the time, it's what we're doing now, talking, it's looking at your body language, are they in a volatile position, kind of looking for all those signs, and how you can actually, and that relationship building with the prisoner.
I was going to say that.
It's such a huge thing, right? That respect, that relationship. The better relationship you had, it could self-govern to a vast degree, because you've got prisoners who are more experienced, who have been there a long time, saying to other new prisoners who are trying to make a name for themselves, cool it, these are good staff, they'll, they'll treat you fairly, so you don't need to act in this particular way. So there's a little bit of self-governance that came into it as well, but all of those things I loved.
Nice. It's definitely not black and white, I think, because people on the outside they probably see it's like how the police and a criminal is, they're out to get me, and it's cat and mouse. In the prison, it's a bit more dynamic, because you live with these people, like you're on shift with them.
You spend more time with these people than what you do at home, with your family. But, and that's a true fact. You're there an awful lot. So you've got to find a way of being very firm, because we've got to consider the age group that we're dealing with. So you've got to be very firm but very fair, and you build up that relationship, you build up that rapport, and with the prisoners specifically, and the staff as well, so that everyone's on the same tune, everyone's on the same kind of wavelength and the same mentality. And yes, it was volatile. It's always volatile in the prison service. When you've got that age group, but you can manage that risk and manage the situations, really effectively and really well.
100%,
So that on the odd occasion when it does go a little bit sideways, or we need more people to contain the situation, then we're well equipped to do so.
Nice. So you finish your training, you've got your award. Well done. I didn't know you got that.
I can't remember the name of it, and I'm sure in the outbuilding somewhere it's there.
What was, if you can remember, because we're going back in time, and I can remember this, is you've come out of training, what was your first impression walking into the establishment and walking onto the unit you're going to work on? Do you know what I mean? Because it's different.
And do you know what? When I look back to my 27-year-old self, I want to say there or thereabouts. So you're talking 20 odd years ago. And my honest side of me at the time, I'd be like, the bravado. I'm going to walk in super confident and all the rest of it. Whereas actually, there's probably quite a lot of anxiety, quite a lot of nervousness, and uncertainty as to exactly what you're walking into. But I always recall the very first day, I knew what unit I was going on to, Unit 15. I was with Rodders, my pal, as well. We're both on the same unit. That made my day. We're just like both assigned to the same unit. And I had, I use nicknames. It's cool, like Punchy, Parky, Punchy. People who were there who held your hand, reassured you, gave you the confidence, and you're starting to learn from the best shades as well. I still see him now in the village. Some great people who without that experience and without them taking you under their wing, that made it an amazing experience. I remember the first day being there, a little bit of a holy crap moment. This shit's real, kind of mentality.
Isn't it?
To getting through your first day, I think I was probably T-boy, right, for the first 6 months. That's probably like the most important role I had. Was making the teas, but it was part of the, not initiation, but part of your learning from others who are really experienced. And from the get-go, I loved it. I knew I was going to love the prison service, and I remember walking up beaming after that first shift.
Wicked, yeah. Right. And what you're saying there though is you walk on and there's a little bit of you. I was apprehensive as well, because it's like you're aware that a lot of the prisoners know that you're new.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they've never seen you before, so you're aware
that's probably the scariest part, right?
Yeah.
Like prisoners looking straight through going, you don't have a clue.
Yeah, exactly.
What you're doing, and I'm going to take advantage of every opportunity, and that plays in your mind over and over, and you're trying to walk.
And that's you new to a job. You know, most new jobs, someone would give you that mentorship or that guidance or that allowance for a mistake, but you're thinking, I don't want to be done over by these lads that know a bit more than me.
Oh, yeah, I mean, they could say, put me down for the gym list. You'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem, mate. Yeah, no worries at all. You've just been had over because it's been twice already that day,
Yeah.
It's little things like that, but I was super fortunate. I had like Parky, Punchy, particularly.
To give you that heads up.
Who were like, took me under the wing, looked after me, supported me. And they were a huge part of my development, in the earlier years. And led me on to being a senior officer, custodial principal officer, custodial manager, the same thing, by the way, the name of those, and a use of force instructor. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of Punchy and, and other people who, I can't think of a nickname for him as well.
It'll come to you.
Who was a C&R instructor, and led you down that path from the early days.
And
you're embraced into that, is fraternity the right word? I don't know. You're embraced into that.
Yeah, I guess it is fraternity.
Yeah, that environment.
Yeah.
And
that's why they called it like the GP family, the Glen Parva family.
For sure, yeah.
Really connected, As well as that, because I'm always on the channel, I'm always finding that both sides of the coin as such, So you had that mentorship and you had Punchy and Rodders and all that. What about early prisoner interactions that kind of shaped because you know what I mean, you're getting to know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think to a degree we're quite fortunate because we're on the induction unit, which is a unit where prisoners were received into the prison and went on to the induction unit initially before going into, I don't want to say general population, sounds a bit Americanized, doesn't it?
The more residential
but going into the more residential units, know, so from that perspective, most of the prisoners coming in, you had your repeat offenders and what have you, but the induction unit was a stopgap for them before they moved on to a more established unit. So I probably got the best start possible by going on to that unit initially, because you didn't have your established prisoners who knew the routine, they knew how to work the staff, work with the prisoners and manipulate situations. So for me, those early days, I was pretty fortunate by going on to the induction units. But then equally, my first interactions with prisoners, I was probably trying to be more the persona or the pretense of trying to be more experienced than what I actually was. If I'm looking back and if I'm being true to myself, I was probably trying to be more, I know what I'm doing, I'm super experienced, because it kind of drilled into you at the New Bold Revel. I'm not sure if you remember as well, that you always say, don't let them know that you're squeaky clean, you're brand new, kind of give off that persona that you've got the experience, that you're not brand new into it. But that's bullshit. That's bullshit, because people see through, they see through that, they see the brand new crease on your shirt, and they see the number GP whatever that signifies you're brand new, and all of those things, and it's obvious, you can't hide that. And I think you don't need to, actually. You shouldn't have to hide it. You just need to learn.
100%.
You need to learn quickly, actually. That's the key. You need to learn very quick, but you need to learn. And you are going to make mistakes. There's things that I did, like, kind of letting out prisoners from the cells when you shouldn't have let them out, let someone out on association, association where you play, they get together, kind of associate with one another.
You've missed that they're on basic or something, because it's on the board and you're not aware.
Giving someone a TV back, there's mistakes, but you learn from them, and that's life experience.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's very dynamic, like you say. Now we'll go a bit forward to like certain things that you were going through throughout your career. So you're becoming a C&R instructor, and obviously what kind of shaped that, of like you having certain incidents that you can remember that left an impression, certain I think memorable incidents kind of thing that happened to you.
I think for me, from the get-go, I always loved being involved in absolutely everything. So if there was any incidents, any opportunity to support my colleagues and to support a situation, to bring it to a successful resolution. So, you're controlling the environment, controlling the situation. I absolutely loved it. So what led me to wanting to be a use of force instructor, there was key figures like Punchy and, kind of other people who were instructors at the time themselves. And I was like, I'd love to be part of that role. So if there was any incidents where we needed to get kitted up, or there were just incidents, I ran to every single bell that was going in Parva, whether it was North End, South End. I didn't care, because potentially my colleagues are at risk. And there's potential.
And just let me put in there a little bit, just describe, because I'm trying to do it. Staff are going to relate to this, but someone that doesn't have a clue about jail, tell me about what happens when something's going on, say on another wing, and then what happens for you to get to an incident.
And I think there's various different forms, right? There's a general alarm, so someone presses the button, which means there could be prisoners having a fight, there could be a prisoner assaulting a member of staff, there could be you could be on a landing with a particular prisoner, like one or two of you, and you're struggling to control the situation, and there's more getting involved. So if someone presses a general alarm, then it goes across everyone's radios, and you'll hear a general alarm, Unit 11, general alarm. And that means staff in that particular area or zone need help. It could be assistance required, which is the next level up, a little bit more serious. But both either one of those things you would hear, and you've got to think to yourself, you're taking yourself into an environment that you don't exactly know what you're running into. You could be running into a reasonably contained situation where you've got one or two prisoners fighting one another. They've both refused to stop fighting, so you've had to restrain both prisoners, return them back to the cell or down to the segregation area, so we've got a bit of a cooling period. Or you could be going into something a lot more serious, or staff assault, or multiple prisoners, or refusal to come off the exercise. There's a million and one things that can go wrong, or that can be concerted in discipline within the prison service. But when you heard that bell, for me, that's the get to that area as quickly as possible, but also make sure that if there's 4 of you on a particular unit, not all 4 of you are running, or 4 of you are making your way to there, because you're leaving no one on the unit that you're meant to be staffing and supporting.
It's a mad moment.
So normally it'd be like
decide,
1 or 2 of you would either decide beforehand, or you would be nearest to the gate, so you'll be off, and you'd always shout, "I'm going," to whoever's left on the unit. And there'd often be 1 or 2 from each unit who would attend. And most of the time it's resolved by the time you've got there. Or sometimes you'd be, as a use of force instructor, I'd normally turn up and take over, control the situation. So I'd be like, right, you're not needed anymore, staff, go back to your units. Right, let's handcuff this prisoner, let's control the situation, let's calm it down, let's swap the staff over, let the other staff get a cup of tea, let's de-escalate the situation even further, because you've got the adrenal cocktail, as we always talk about, when the adrenaline goes. If you've been directly involved in that incident, if you're a prisoner, I'm an officer, and we've gone into a physical contact situation, your adrenaline's high, my adrenaline's high. And in order to bring that down, I'd replace myself with another member of staff and say, let's cool it down. You've got a fresh face to talk to, someone who's calmer, who's not been, that adrenal cocktail's not been impacting or affecting them. So there's so many things that, you walk into a scenario that you want to assess, control, contain, de-escalate, resolve, so there's so many things that run through your head, and that's the dynamic risk assessment that I absolutely loved.
Wow.
That was I'm not saying it's always exciting or always fun, but you're protecting colleagues, supporting the situation, control, good order and discipline, you know, as well. So, and sometimes, you know, you built up such a great relationship with the prisoners on there. You could, and we have on many occasions walked onto a unit. Oh, you're right, Mr. Raven, really sorry. I'm walking back to my cell. You know, and sometimes you just need a different face, someone who they're familiar with, calming down the situation, just say, look, you're refusing to return to yourself for the staff. Talk to me. Take over, you know, I can take over, or you can take over. You know, I might be a little bit het up. You might say, Rave, go and take a seat. I've got this. You know, and that will de-escalate. Then you and the prisoner, you know, you'd walk back to the cell, job done. You know, so we could talk a million scenarios, right? And they're not just scenarios; they're live examples of what's happened in the past. So
100%.
But all of these things brought me to the point of I'd love to be able to give back, support colleagues and staff. I love talking, as we are. Love teaching. Loved every mechanical part of the control and restraint, the body language, the demeanour, the de-escalation. You know, kind of the method of entry situation, all the different things that, you know, the scenarios you could think of, the baton training, every element of that.
There's an art to it,
There's so much to it. And being privileged enough, being, you know, allowed to teach that to others was a huge honour. Like, absolutely loved it. Wore that badge with pride. You know, and felt great that I was called upon on a very regular basis, along with the other instructors, you know, where needed, to help resolve, de-escalate or manage, incident manage a situation, you know, to a successful conclusion where no, you know, kind of injuries were reduced. Don't get me wrong, we got injured a lot. Prisoners got injured. You know, of course, that's the environment that we're working in.
Definitely.
But you'd always try and control that situation and minimise the risk to everyone involved. But all of that, you know, led me to, this is the passion. This is, you know, it wasn't a job. It was a role that you know, we all did and we all loved. It wasn't like working. It never felt like work. You know, certainly not in the first 10 of my 11 years. It didn't feel like work. It felt like this is a great career move. It was a great,
fantastic
position to be in.
Can you, because I'm thinking of a couple what we had. I had one with, I'm not going to say his name, but I was working on Unit 8 and we're on the top landing. And what we've done is we've let the basics out, but then we realised Soch needs to come out. So he needs to bang up for the rest of Soch to come out, this one lad, and he was refusing to. And there's one of the Unit 8 staff with me, and we're saying, look, this is it now. You need to go behind your door. We're going to put you behind your door, kind of thing. And
given all the options,
loads of chances. You know what I mean? We've tried to talk him down, tried to reason. He's saying, no, I'm having my full time or whatever, and he'd had it. But he'd done it by his own clock or whatever he thought.
Of course.
So basically, we're on the top landing. We're quite near his cell, and I've gone to get him under control with his head, and then the other officer's gone to grab one of his arms because there's only two of us. I've completely kind of misjudged where his head was because he had quite a big afro. And like, as I've grabbed it, it's like kind of like a cushion. It's just popped back out. And luckily the other member of staff like jumped on him. But he jumped up in front of me as if to say, right, you've not done that, so now I'm going to have my go. So luckily he kind of saved me, and he'll remind me for that quite a few times, that he saved my life. And then we just put the lad back behind the door. But just to say, after that incident, like you say, with the rapport with staff, sometimes the lad comes back to you and you think they're going to be arsey with you and all this
volatile.
Kind of thing. You got to look out. But he was like, you know what, boss, I was in the wrong. And I wasn't normally on that wing. So I just said, look, I was just following what the regime was asking for.
And didn't you find that 9 times out of 10, that if you had to get to that last degree of restraining a prisoner and they'd come back onto the unit, more often than not, they would say, I was in the wrong there. And I kind of pushed you to the limit, to the point that you had no other option than to restrain me back to my cell or down to the segregation unit or wherever we took them, depending on their volatility level. And more often than not, you found that they were probably your model best prisoners beyond that point. They were either taken on as cleaners, as orderlies, because they'd for the first time potentially in their lives, someone said, no, that's not going to happen, and we'd like you to do it this way because it's the right way and it's fair for all and all the rest of it. And for the first time potentially they've had a role model in their life that's actually stood up to them and said, no, that's not right, that's not good. We don't do it this way, you know, and if you don't do it the way that I'm politely and correctly asking you to, there's consequences off the back of it. So you've got to remember, for those who weren't in prison service or those who are listening to this, that there's so many steps before the point that you'd have to have a physical interaction with a prisoner, in which you'd have to take control of the prisoner to put them wherever you wanted them to go, right? So you'd have that conversation with them. You're given plenty of opportunities to do it under their own steam and to do it, you know, without us, you know, kind of having to go to that physical step. But then at some point it has to get to that point if there's no other options available, because you've exhausted all the options, right, available 100%. To you. So you're not going to be there 3 hours later saying, but please would you mind going back behind your cell door, you know, because then the good order and discipline of the jail, and it starts to mess up the regime and everything else. And then that prisoner also is like, well, I've been able to get away with that. And then other prisoners start to get away with more and more stuff. Then all of a sudden you've got a very volatile prison environment, and you've got no good order, you know, so things can escalate. So you have to be assertive and fair, and because you're fair about the whole situation and given opportunity, he would come back like he did and said, my bad, you know, I pushed you to that point, and you left you no option, so apologies, and you'd often find that they were pretty good, generally, not always, because you'd have your ones who had enjoyed, so to speak, I'd say to a vast degree, the physical contact and the kind of the challenge.
And wanted to disrupt the regime.
Wanted to disrupt. And do anything they can to do that. Very few and far between, I'd say, in the general population of prisoners. That you had that, you know, and you managed that situation accordingly. You know? But you know, we talk about, you know, different stories, and you know, on that one, you know, there's always a million that come into your head because it was a regular occurrence. That there's always something happening. You know, you never went a day, you know, in Glen Parva that there wasn't some form of incident somewhere in the jail occurring. So in fact, on average, I don't know, what was it, 4 or 5, 6 a day? Most likely.
And I'd put that down to the fact that you said it there, that some of these lads, unfortunately, they've been brought up in, maybe like they've been through juveniles, they've been in the care system, they've been neglected in their lives at home even. And they're kind of used to that being, you know, having anger management issues or whatever. And that's what I'd like to say for the public, to say that some of us, we built up a really good rapport. We were a professional relationship, but to a certain degree, we were like a big brother or a father figure to them.
I had a couple of, sounds weird to say it now when I look back, because I'm at the age now where they could actually call me, you know, dad or probably even granddad nowadays. But, you know, I had some prisoners say to me, you're the first father figure type that I've ever had in my life. And I really respect that. I had one prisoner, I can't name his name, but I loved him to bit. But it was a bit of a rogue, you know, been in and out 7 or 8 times. And every time he came back into the prison, you're right, dad. Literally, you're right, dad. You know, and you know, he was a difficult prisoner. It wasn't good for all the staff, wasn't good for everyone all the time. But we had a real good respect for one another, and he always, you know, kind of respected, trusted. I was doing the right thing, and he would then in turn also do the right thing as well. But you know, he used to like say, you know, every morning, dad, you know, you're right. And it might sound a bit weird to people listening to this, you know, who haven't been in the prison service, but we're talking about building up really good relationships and really good rapport with people. And when you build up a good rapport, you build up a good environment. And if you've got the good environment, then it reduces risk, it reduces the indiscipline. And you're always going to get, I hate saying percentages, you could have 5% of the population that you're never going to have that with them, because they just want to cause disruption at every opportunity, or they're just some people who just can't get through to some people don't want to listen.
And one thing I was thinking of there, which I don't know how you feel with the training, is that you're dealing with so much stuff, like as in, like I said, the background of the lads that you might not be familiar with yourself. You know what I mean? Coming across these lads that predominantly are from the worst council estates of Britain with the youth offenders, because it's such a big catchment. And the fact that for me, what I felt limited in is like mental health. I wasn't aware of the mental health. So some of the lads, they're going to get their meds for things that I don't even know what that's doing for them. Do you know what I mean?
How is that assisting? How is that helping?
Yeah.
And I think on reflection, looking back, we probably didn't know enough back in the day. Back in the day, you know, we're talking about back in the day.
Yeah.
But we probably didn't know enough on mental health to equip us efficiently enough at all times. And you're not just talking about mental health, you're talking about some of these guys, you know, their girlfriends, the partners, whoever, they were pregnant, or they just split up with them, or you know, they've had people passed away in the family. There's a million things happening externally for these prisoners.
Yeah,
they've just got off the phone to a really bad phone call. The girlfriend's just split up with you, you know, and comes out of the telephone room and starts smashing things up, which you know, happened.
Yeah.
Or they picked a fight with someone because they didn't know how to manage their emotions.
Yeah, 100%.
And all of those things.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, we go back to building up the relationships, but the mental health things was at that age group as well is really significant. It is at every age group, not dismissing any age group here, but very significant and influential at that age group. That mental health is quite a primary concern and a primary issue.
Yeah.
And a lot of things at that age was about image, your status, you know, within the prison service, you know, within the unit that you're on, and wider within the jail and what have you. So, and that perception of you didn't want to be had over by somebody else, or, you know, you had prisoners who were in debt to other prisoners. And, you know, there's a lot of things that happen within the environment.
There's so much going on.
And you can never, I mean, we'd need a 10-hour, 24-hour interview conversation to go over all the different elements that you have to take into account. You know, a prisoner who was great with you one day might not be the next, and you don't know the reason why, and you have to try and work out the reason why without it escalating to a volatile situation, which often it could do because they're not able to control their emotions because they don't understand what's going on themselves. You know, so it's a lot.
And to say that again, I always flip it back and I say the same for the staff. And because we knew them personally, and the lads, they wouldn't be aware of this necessarily. They might get an inkling, but something's happened to a member of staff. They've lost a relative, or they've come out of a relationship, and they're not letting that be known, but that's going to affect their demeanour on a shift. Do you know what I mean? Or
whether we admit it or not, your external influence of whether it's family related or anything what's happening outside of the prison service, as much as you don't, you know, you don't want to let it affect you inside the prison service, to whatever degree it always will, because it's always subconscious or consciously there in your mind. You know, I was really fortunate. There was not an awful lot of life things happening externally for me, other than good things predominantly happening in the service. But I do recall a couple of occasions where it wasn't so good, you know, for myself externally, and it does impact you. You know, you do go kind of more reserved or within yourself and what have you, and but that's where the support of your colleagues, the GP, you know, the Glen Parva family, all came in and clubbed together and actually supported you. Often took the piss out of you.
The banter.
But that was the support, though. The banter, the piss take, the this, the that.
Takes your mind off of it,
You know, oh, your girlfriend just split up with you. Oh, boo-hoo, get over it, you know. But
your gun's not big enough.
Have you lost weight? You know, you're looking like you look like not been down the gym in 2 months. But all of those things were the camaraderie, the relationship, you know, that tightness that we all, the majority of us had, that made it a great environment. There was counselling for us.
100%.
Support mechanism for us. If I saw a colleague struggling, you know, you did two things. You supported them and you took the piss out of them. But they went hand in hand. And that's what got you through. You know, it got you through those kind of, got you through those times.
Brilliant.
You know, I'm not sure if it's recording now. Then I think that's significant to know that not everyone enjoyed the prison service. Not everyone had that same experience or that same journey. And someone like, well, it's, you know, you're painting a picture here. You know, whereas this is the picture in my head. It might not be the picture in your head. We might have worked alongside one another in the same time frame, in the same environment, on the same unit, in the same place, and I didn't see it that way. Which is fine. Because everyone's got their own perspective.
And you were going to say this, I haven't asked you yet, but like what you thought about how the prison service had transitioned over that time of your career, yeah? So a new officer towards the end is having a different experience to when you first joined.
And do you know what? I was just thinking about this as well. When I joined, when you joined, I'm sure everyone just said, "Oh, the prison service is going downhill." You know, look at these ragtag people coming in. You know, like me and Rod was walking through the door. They were like, "Oh God, who dragged these guys through?" You know, through the door. And I'm sure, kind of generationally, kind of time upon time, that probably happened all the time. And I probably fell into that same trap of when I'd been there a few years, and then you'd looked at the quality of people coming into the service, then you're like, oh God, the quality is going downhill more and more. And I think I've still got that, sounds awful to say, but I think I've still got that same perception now, that the quality of staff that they're trying to encourage into the prison service isn't like what it used to be. But then I'm sure the older generations before I joined said the same about me, and you know, kind of joining, like it's not the same caliber, it's not the same strength of people.
And you had so much enthusiasm that it's a shame that someone would think that. Do you know what I mean? Because really, I always thought that there's that rose-tinted glasses of how it was. And we were dealing with a lot more, like it had gone more to rehabilitation kind of focus, rather than just order and discipline. Do you know what I mean? It become more complex. Even courses that they do to deal with their behaviour and stuff
of course.
like that.
You know, we're trying to make it meaningful. We're trying to make it educational. You know, there were things prisoners could do. You know, it wasn't just bang up association, gym, good order and discipline, lock and beyond the door. You know, which a lot of people external to the prison service might think that's all you do, right? You're a key turner. You know, you open the door, you lock the door. You know, and that's pretty much it. They would go on the exercise yard, all the things you see on TV, but the complexities go far deeper. There's so much more. And we were trying to do. There was the rehabilitation, there was the drug rehabilitation, the alcohol rehabilitation, the mental health rehabilitation, the volatile, I can't remember the name, or, you know, when you've got, violence reduction, aggressive tendencies. You know, there were life skill courses, right? You know, when you got out.
You imagine this, sorry, to explain for the people that are watching, obviously some know, but if you've not been in the prison service, for VR, violent reduction, there'd be people like Rave that were like C&R instructors that would kind of initiate picking a lad that was probably well respected within the jail and had a good position like an orderly or enhanced. He'd worked his way up and been in. And he would be there, chosen by, you know, certain staff to say two lads have been fighting. He would come in the middle and mediate that situation to say, why did it get to that? Can you agree to disagree even, and like come to some kind of compromise to stop any more violence continuing? Do you know what I mean? Any more?
Yeah, well, there's loads of different scenarios and different methods that were introduced in order to reduce the violence. You know, the violence reduction, as you know, as we call it on there as well. So there were varying things like, you know, kind of using kind of peer-to-peer influence as well. And that relationship between prisoner and prisoner, and that relationship between someone holding a status of being an orderly on the unit or working in the kitchens, or myself or you in the position that we held, having that relationship with the prisoner. So there was various different things that we were kind of introducing and trying to reduce and make it a safer, a better environment, right? You know, and I think that was always the goal. Always. It has to be the goal, you know, when you're working in a prison environment, is to make it the safest environment for everyone, not just the prisoners, for the staff. And when we talk about staff as well, we're not just talking prisoners, officers here. We're talking about educational staff. We're talking about healthcare staff. You know, we're talking about probation staff. So all the other different departments. You're talking. You know, there's your administrative staff. You've got your kitchen staff. You've got people who in the support, the workshop, the supportive roles. So you create an environment that's safe for all, so they feel safe. You know, they didn't benefit from. You know, we did kind of use of force. We did sessions for civilian staff, enabled to give them better confidence to kind of help in a conflict or difficult situation, but they weren't equipped to the same level we were. They didn't have the same training. So when you talk about creating a safe environment, it is what you're talking about for everyone who probably wasn't as confident or competent as we were in order to de-escalate a situation. You could walk into a workshop and the workshop tutor's really struggling to control the prisoners that he had in there, and you'd walk in and like, oh, you're right, Mr. Ingram, sorry.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, you need to go back to your unit. I'm removing you from the situation. And they'd be like, no, I'm coming with you.
Yeah.
Whereas the tutor, the instructor, wouldn't have had that same level of authority or ability to do that, whether it be competence, confidence, relationship.
Yeah.
You know,
and even what they
the status
think of
that you
as
held.
in a role. Yeah, like, is it my duty to do that?
Yeah,
You know what I
of
mean?
course. You held a status.
Yeah.
You held a position.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Okay. So even to balance that as well, to say, what did you see? Because I know what I saw in terms of, staff were changing. And to be fair to the older staff, they'd be like, what, peer-to-peer support? What the hell are you on about? And I get that, because it's just a transition in time. Like, they wouldn't have done that in the 70s and 80s, I'm sure. But like, also the caliber of staff. Say for me, I think there's a plus and a minus to this, if I'm being honest. And it was the introduction of more female staff, definitely from say 20 years ago or more, from the time we joined. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's, and I think when you look at trying to make it a real diverse population, staffing wise as well, and I think it's a real good thing. It's because there's elements that are brought into the environment where, as guys in a very hostile male environment, we're probably not as well equipped to deal with certain issues or situations or thought process or mentality. So when you introduce a more diverse population from a staffing perspective, it then enhances, and people will be looking at this going, what the hell are you talking about? You know,
he's not being paid by the prison service anymore.
No,
He's not.
Exactly. It enhances the environment no matter what. You know, it does enhance the environment.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were certain things that, you know, kind of what we all did, you know, like whether it be volatile situations or encouraging prisoners to go back to the cell, something that you and I might not have been able to do. There might have been another member of staff, whether it be male or female, irrelevant, that was able to de-escalate that situation with a different person and a different perspective taken upon that on there as well. So, you know, that side of things was really important and useful to have, and introduce a more diverse population staffing wise, made it, you know, continue to be a safe environment. I think key to it though, I know we talk about, have we diluted the pool of staffing over the years? And I felt like that probably was the case, that there was less people coming from experienced backgrounds joining the prison service, like whether it be the military or whether it be life experience, people coming from very diverse life experience backgrounds. Then I started personally, and disagree or you're like, that's fine, you know, this is my perspective. You started to then introduce younger, much more younger people with very little or no life experience, throwing them into a very difficult, challenging environment with that age group of prisoners, or any age group for that matter. And that diluting the good order, diluting the what we were trying to achieve within the prison service. And that for me, I've seen, or felt like I'd seen the, I hate to use the word demise, that's awful, and like deterioration to a degree of quality of staff. I'm not saying for everyone, because we've got some wicked quality of staff still joining the prison service.
Of course.
But do we encourage it? You know, do we encourage that diversity that we had when we were there? You know, people from different backgrounds, you learnt quickly. There was enough experienced people there to bring on board the people who weren't as experienced, but they picked up quickly. It feels like that's less the case nowadays, where there's higher turnover of staff in the prison service than what there ever has been historically before.
There's a problem.
So your tenure, you know, the time in which you're spending within the prison service had been, I was there 11 years. I know people have been 20, 30 years plus, you know, so, you know, that felt like a good period of time that I'd been in there and learnt an awful lot in a short period of time. Whereas you've got people who probably only stay a year or 2 or 3 years now, you know, so what used to be a long-term career is probably less so nowadays, but with that you're getting less experience, less commitment,
there's a consequence,
and a reduced tenure, and there's a consequence.
I would say to the order, and that's what you're saying, you're being fair there. It's not the new staff coming in, it's the situation they're coming into, and this whole, the kind of infrastructure or the nature
where they're learning
of it.
from, where's the mentors,
Exactly.
where's the experience?
How can they be expected to to succeed if they're, to me, again, I'm not saying who does this from the top down of like, you know, I'm trying to think.
Well, it's your hierarchy, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know, it's that hierarchical mentality where it's not coming from, like we could go right up to government kind of mentality and policy and process and all the rest of it. But when I joined, the mentors that we had 15 years, 10 years, 5 years experience, and you're learning from people who are very experienced in what they're doing. They had great life skills. They're able to take you under the wing. If you're joining the prison service fresh now, as an example, you're walking in, your mentor might have only been in 18 months, 2 years. I'm not saying that's always a negative, because they might have learnt really quickly and, you know, kind of put themselves in a good position. But generally speaking, we're talking about here, you're learning from people who probably don't have as much experience as when we benefited from when we joined.
100%. Yeah.
And that makes it a really volatile, difficult situation, you know. And when you hear stories of nowadays staff standing there watching their colleagues being assaulted and not doing anything to support them, or there's no-go areas in the prisons, you know, nowadays, and there's not enough people willing to create good order and discipline from a staffing perspective. They'd rather stand back, you know, and not get involved. Then all of a sudden you've got a small nucleus of people who will get involved, and a larger majority of population of staffing who won't get involved. And I never remember that from Parva days, you know. Not so significantly anyway. There's always a healthy pool of people who are able to support and manage a situation, and you know, kept that whole jail of 860, I can't remember,
over 800 the roll,
over 800 roll, that it still felt like a really good controlled environment that we worked in spite of all the incidents that we had on a regular basis. But for every incident we had, it was controlled and managed extremely well and effectively. And that's the difference.
100%. And what I feel, I don't know if, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and maybe you have, because you talk to people who work in the service or used to work with us, it's that I feel it reflects society, the fact that sometimes that whole diversity policy come in and we hire people from every background and all this, and like you say, the turnover's high, but at the end of the day, the way I see it, the people coming into prison, they're still of the same caliber, you know, and they've been in jail, like you say, these lifers or whatever, and they're seeing these new staff come in 1-2 years and thinking, what do you know about life? Like, you can't pull the wool over these people's eyes, you know what I mean? And they're not in it for a bad time, because they're lifers generally, but it's like, what are you bringing to the table? Do you know what I mean?
And I'm guessing things like, we go off on a tangent again. When you look at statistically, has assaults on staff increased over the years, you know, from 20 years ago to where we are now? Has the assaults on staff increased? Has contraband increased? So yes, you've got modern technology which brings in, you know, whether it's over the drones and so forth. So that is an element to that. But are there more staff being coerced, being conditioned, being groomed into bringing in drugs, mobile phones? Are they being threatened more externally? So I think there's probably an increase in that side of it as well, and less of a commitment, you know, to the role and to the job. So you kind of look at recruitment and you look at, are we just trying to get bums on seats nowadays because we're desperate for staff in the prison service?
To encourage them,
And I'm not sure if you saw on Facebook recently, there's an advertisement for prison officers encouraging encouraging people to join the prison service. Out of curiosity, I was looking at all the comments on there, and sadly, vast majority of the comments were, don't join the service, it's awful, I've been in the prison service. So many negative comments is they don't pay enough, why would you put yourself in that environment, which is awful, because I can only go on my experiences when I was in the prison service. Pay was okay, it wasn't great, wasn't awful, it was okay. I think nowadays it isn't where it needs to be to encourage people to join, but back in the day I was okay with that salary. I loved the environment that I was working in. I loved the prison service. I was extremely passionate about it. And I couldn't wait to get into work the next day. Everything, you know, is all consuming in a positive way. I don't feel like we're getting that same engagement, that same mentality And that's a broad sweep of the brush, by the way. You're going to get fantastic individuals joining the prison service.
Yeah, you should get a better...
But I feel like we're still getting a majority, potentially, people who are joining the prison service who are not in it for the long haul, don't really know what environment they're walking into.
Yeah.
Are we setting them up for success when they join the prison service nowadays? Or are we setting them up to fail because, like you said, the infrastructure is not there like it used to be?
Yeah.
So are we really setting them up to fail?
I feel it's a sad state of affairs, but we're saying this anyway, me and Paul, to say I like to look at solutions, you know what I mean? And I think that is a major point that we're hitting on, that's something that needs to be resolved in order to make life better for the staff, but also for the prisoners. Because the sad thing I see is when you have this, this poor discipline and things going on where there's lots of contraband and no control as such in establishments and no-go areas, it's like, I know from a prisoner's point of view, they're going to think, oh, I'm having a great time. But what I think is, have a great time, but what are you getting out of it? You're just having this great time. You're still wasting your life in there.
Yeah.
And because there's no order and discipline, what are you learning from it? What is good is coming of it? You're just having a whale of a time.
You don't want it to be Butlins holiday, right?
Yeah.
You don't want it to be that, that kind of environment. It shouldn't be that environment because that doesn't encourage people to want to join the prison service and want to be part of that kind of fraternity or that long-term career that it actually can be. I've got so many friends who are still in the prison service and it is a long-term career for them.
Yeah.
And there are many prisons and establishments out there that are ran extremely well, very safely, very effectively as well. But we're also talking about here the flip side to that, where it's not a great environment and we're not setting people up potentially for success when they join. They don't know what they're walking into. I had amazing people around me, so we never used to get loads and loads of new start prison officers in the prison service. It was trickles of people coming in because people stayed for a long period of time in the prison service previously. Now it's a continual rotation, a turnstile of staff coming in, going out, rotationally, because we haven't got that kind of a retainment of staff anymore in the prison service. Again, I'm talking from someone who's not been in the service for many years, but we've got friends who are in the prison service who are seeing this day in, day out, that you're not having that same retention rate as what we used to have.
Yeah.
But hey, we're not going to resolve that in a day.
I know. So, okay, I'll move on to more things to do with yourself kind of thing of like, what do you think the job how it affected you? Because we talk about lads, as in I say lads for prisoners, being institutionalised, but what about for, say, staff? What impact did it have on you, do you feel, ultimately throughout your career?
And do you know what? It does, to a vast degree, it does institutionalise staff as well, because you're in that environment on a regular basis. So you do get into that institutionalised mentality, the routine, the process, the routine and what have you as well. So you do fall into that. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Institutionalisation, easy for me to say, isn't a bad thing. It was, so from my perspective as well, there's so many positives that I took out of it. But it brought out the best of me. It probably brought out, in some respects, the worst of me as well, because it does bring out your extremities. I would say, for emotional, how you are as an individual, how you are as a character, and as a personality. It brought out both sides, and you kind of, I loved what I did. I loved the prison. So it gave me amazing life skills. It gave me amazing ability to communicate, body language, conflict resolution. It gave me the confidence internally and external to the prison service in just general public. So all of those things. But then on the flip side, you could potentially almost put yourself on a pedestal, and some people would probably comment, well, you did, Ray. I did put myself, or people did. And you kind of do, because when you're in a position of authority, and when you, whether it was a officer, senior officer, use of force instructor, whatever position that you were in, you did have that flip side to it to a degree as well. And when I say it could have brought out, or did bring out, the worst in me in some incidents, well, it did, because when you're trying to control a situation and it did become physical, then that isn't the best side of you that comes out of it, because you had to have that controlled aggression, and I hate to use that word, but it is that controlled aggression in order to control a situation that's in front of you, right? You couldn't just go in there kind of relaxed, and you had to hype yourself up. You had to get yourself in the zone.
Of course. And you're not a robot, do you know what I mean?
If I've got a prisoner who's got a manufactured weapon in their hand and that's targeted for me, you've got to meet that hostility with additional hostility. And if you're not able to get away from that situation, if you're not able to exit safely and you have to control that situation, then you've got to take yourself to a different level, to a different place. So when I say it brings out the worst in you, it brings out that side of you that I'm not always, it shouldn't be a good thing, that I was very competent in controlling a volatile situation because I had the ability, the mentality and the skill in all, not all of the time, most of the time, control that situation through controlled aggression.
Because there's a stress and pressure on you. And I feel, if you don't mind me saying, the way you were perceived to me is you were super respected by the staff and by the lads as well.
Comments on this might vary, might differ.
That is the general feel that we get. And if I could sum up the way that you were looked at to staff and prisoners, is that you were firm, but you were fair. So for me, when you walked on, and especially in your C&R instructor's role and, you know, taking certain incidents, it was like a relief for you to come through the door. A lot of the time when you said you were going to an incident, the other staff didn't mind because they're like, obviously you're going to go because you're like the figurehead of, you know, that kind of part of it.
But you wanted that to be the case as well because you wanted to give that confidence to other staff and to other people to say, Rave's here or Punch is here or such and such is here to help resolve that situation. And there were loads and loads of other staff, right, who also had that same mentality or authority or ability to walk into an environment and take over or control or supervise or assist. And I felt proud of the fact that people would look to me like as an example and say, don't worry, Rave's here, he's going to control this or help support, control the situation or get involved or take over, whatever it was. I loved that. Because we were supporting one another. It was that family again. It was that we're helping our colleagues here and let's get this situation managed and dealt with. Same as when you used to teach use of force. It was like, let's help people, you know, give them the tools and the ability to do the job better. And I loved being in that position. But the flip side of that, you kind of felt like you were put on a pedestal at times, potentially. And that comes with a lot of pressure.
Of course.
Comes with a lot of responsibility. On there as well, you know, to do the right thing and to do it correctly, safely. You know, the right protocol and all the rest of it. So, but I thrived in that situation. I loved it. You know, they're the situations I knew I was pretty contrary to comments that I was pretty good at. That I knew I could.
No, people definitely felt that. And let me just say as well, again, we go off on a tangent, but it's relating to that. You know, as prison officers, we're not just always saying, oh, we're going to control and restrain the situation because we enjoy, as the lads might say, prisoners might say, we're beating them up and we're bending them up and we want to hear them scream. It was the fact that we wanted order and discipline to have control, but also I feel, and I don't know if some prisoners would admit that, if they feel confident in the order and control of the establishment, it makes their life easier. Do you know what I mean? They're coming into Glen Parva saying, I feel safe. I feel that when staff can deal with incidents,
they manage the situation.
I'm not going to get hurt. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't think people look at it from that point of view always. The order and control is not there for us to beat lads up. It's for us to gain control so everyone feels safe, like you say, from
the
teachers.
Good order and discipline for everyone in that closed environment. That was key to absolutely everything. And you've got to remember, some prisoners wanted to get restrained to take them away from a situation so that they could then speak to you. It sounds weird, right? But then to speak to you and say, I'm being bullied. This is happening. That's happening. I needed to get off. The only way I could get off was by being volatile towards you, Mr. Ingram, for you to then restrain me, for me to be off the unit,
whatever,
you know, and all the rest of, you know, but that went through prisoners' heads, you know, that there was, how do they get themselves out of a situation? Or they might not have liked you. You might have put them on basic the day before. You might have given them an IEP the day before.
Yeah.
Or...
And it's wound them up.
Yeah.
They've thought about it overnight.
Or they've had the most embarrassing fight with another prisoner ever. And we've seen them, like handbags at dawn, like most embarrassing fights in the world ever, caught on CCTV. But that was orchestrated in front of you, intentionally for you to split them up.
Yeah.
So that you could get them, that individual, away from that environment. So things like that, you'd probably pick on someone who didn't even know, walk out of his cell for breakfast in the morning, right in front of you intentionally, and push a prisoner or try and throw a lame punch at a prisoner in order for you to get involved.
Yes, exactly.
To then talk to you and say, Mr. Ingram, I've been bullied, or I'm in debt. So there's a million reasons behind it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But again,
you don't find out till after, like you say.
No, and we do digress. Again, but more often than not, the prisoner would come back on afterwards, or would change units or whatever, and they'll be like grateful for that, whatever interaction it was, right?
Yeah.
They were grateful for it, which sounds weird again, but.
I know we've been a little bit serious, so I wanted to touch on a few bits, and I know it's hard to remember off the top of your head, but for me, kind of funny things that just happen, or just like, it's not so serious. So one for me that's not even an incident, is we had, and they'll know, whoever's listening and is from Glen Parva, they'll know that we had a Scouse SO on my unit, and it's a weekend, so the regime's quite relaxed, and they're all out from two of the landings on our wing, and the SO that I'm talking about is in the TV room, getting a haircut like orderly, watching the TV. And I'm like, wow, this is like, no one on the outside would expect this to be happening. Do you know what I mean?
It was a funny, and there's so many.
Or playing table tennis together, and having like staff would have a little tournament between the lads on the sofa.
We always had tournaments.
Yeah.
We always played pool and table tennis. The thing is, what you got to remember if you're not in the prison environment or prison service is, part of you getting information or building up a rapport, camaraderie, relationship with a prisoner. People might not like the word relationship, right? I didn't like the word relationship with a prisoner when I was in the prison service, but whereas now I reflect and say, well, actually, we did build up a relationship with the prisoners, but that would be through playing table tennis with them, playing pool with them, chatting to them on association, chatting to them in the cell, getting them a phone call that they're probably not entitled to at that particular time. Showing a little bit of care, showing a little bit of like sincerity and kind of supporting someone. But all of those elements, like some funny stories, that that we had, when I used to teach C&I to get into the sumo suit, the big suit where there's a protective suit for myself so that you could get the baton on me and what have you, and the funny environment, the funny kind of scenarios we used to put in place for you guys who were teaching use of force to try and get me out of the cell and put me into a cell or put me into a kind of figure of four and exit the cell safely. I had some great fun learning, great fun kind of doing those physical kind of aspects of it as well as the other parts.
And that helped the staff to bond,
Yeah, for sure. It gave confidence, helped the staff to bond. So there's so many funny environments. I remember a prisoner, I was trying to restrain once, and I got on well with the prisoner. We had a good relationship, but for whatever reason, it was in his head that
it's kicking off
no matter what. And I was by myself at the time, and I didn't want to restrain or try and attempt to restrain him. There was 3 staff to restrain a prisoner safely, correctly, and I was put in a real difficult situation on the stairwell, and this little prisoner, and it was a little wiry little prisoner at the time, and for whatever reason they weren't taking no for an answer, and I'd instigated the physical contact, left me no choice, and I was trying to call for assistance, for support, and no matter what I did with this prisoner, I couldn't keep hold of him for more than 5 seconds. He was just like, every time I got hold of him, I thought, okay, right, I've got you now. Let's wait for the staff so that we can control you better. He was like, no, I'm out of it, Mr. Raven. Now what are you going to... I was like, oh my God. And that felt like it went on for like ages and ages. It might have only been 2 minutes, but it felt like it went on for ages. Every time I thought I'd got him controlled individually by myself, which was... I'd never had any major fear of him punching me or kicking me. He wasn't, I kind of knew it well enough for that situation. I think
but you
essentially,
still need to gain control.
Yeah.
As our position.
I think he just wanted to have a roll around, as we called it back in the day. I think he just wanted to roll around with us, and he found it hilarious. He was laughing, pretty much laughing at me. To be fair, he was like laughing whilst I was trying to control him in this situation. And I think in the end, the situation was controlled. He walked back to his cell, and it was just like, "Good one, Mr. Raven. Nice try." And all the rest of it. And it's quite comical and amusing. And then like the next time he spoke to him, it was like, "Sorry about that, Mr. Raven. I'm not sure what was going through my head.
Yeah.
This, that, and the other."
Yeah.
And you're back to status quo.
Nice.
Again, and you alluded to that fact earlier that just because you've had to restrain a prisoner and they've come back onto your unit again, you never quite know how they're going to react.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, if you've been fair with them in the first instance, and every time if I had to restrain a prisoner, guaranteed, and I was taught this by one of the use of force instructors, go and speak to them. Let the situation calm.
Yeah.
Might be 24 hours, might be 48 hours, might be 1 hour later. Go and see him.
Nice.
Go and speak to him. Explain why. What's happened. Why it's happened.
That's
9 times out of 10, you'll both walk away from that environment going, "Now I fully understand why I was restrained, or what happened."
Yeah.
Sometimes their heads go. They don't know until you talk to them afterwards. They don't know what happened.
Yeah. They black out. Kind of
there's a reason. Behind why we had to restrain a prisoner.
Yeah.
But vast majority of the time, when you went to speak to them afterwards, and I always made a point that's really important, whether they came back on the unit a day later, 2 days later, if I was the SO, whatever at the time, bring them into my office and have a one-to-one, not with anyone else stood around, not with any other staff. Let's have a adult-to-adult, mature talk and say, "Now you're back on the unit. This is how I expect you to conduct yourself. You're not going to get treated any differently from me. I don't hold any grudge." And I never, so important in the prison service, if you held a grudge for every time someone called you a name, a wanker, a twat, this, that, whatever, suck your mum, which is the famous one-liner by the prisoner. You'd hold a grudge for forever and a day.
Yeah.
So had to have the ability to let that go, reset, and say, the second, third, fourth, it might be a 10th opportunity for a prisoner, but you needed that reset, and give them an opportunity to amend, the ways.
Yeah. And I think for yourself, just going back to yourself, obviously to increase your head size or
don't do that anymore,
is that 90% of the comments to you would have been respectful of, "Oh, SO Raven, can you sort this out? Or can you do this? Or boss or gov," you know what I mean? They show you a different side of them as well, the orderly lads especially, you know what I mean? Because we're in and out, working all day with them kind of thing, letting them out, on the landings and stuff. And I just feel like it's not really pushed that much, the rapport. And I don't necessarily credit that with the prison service. I think it's the people within it. You spoke about the characters that mentored and helped you.
That's down to the individuals, down to, you could have someone like Punchy, right, who'd walk onto a unit, a couple of lads who were kicking off, they would see Punchy walk through the door.
Yeah.
"Sorry, boss. Yep, we're going back to ourselves."
Yeah.
Not because they're scared of being hurt or scared of the repercussions. There was a respect there. There was a relationship built up, and there was that rapport. It's like, "Mr. Wilson treats me fair.
Yeah.
It's firm but fair.
Yeah.
I'm going to do as I'm told."
Yeah.
The prisoners might not have known that where they stood with. It might have been guest staff who were on the unit at the time. It might have been someone who wasn't fair. Let's be honest here. Let's call it what it is. Not every staff was fair.
Yeah.
Not every staff was firm. Not every staff was correct in what they did. That happens in life, generally speaking, right?
Any profession.
So, not all prisoners had the same level of respect for every member of staff.
Yeah.
It might have been new. They wouldn't have had zero. They would have had zero respect for you and me when we first joined.
Yeah.
Prisoners would, because we're like, look at these.
Yeah. Or you found
these newbies
that they associated you with the police. Do you know what I mean? They thought, "Oh, you're just the next step down from the police."
Yeah.
But I think most of them got to learn with you spending so much time that this was a different environment, a different relationship that you could manage for their benefit and your benefit.
For sure.
Ultimately, you want a quiet life, You just want to get through the day.
Oh, I used to love
Bang
it.
up.
Yeah.
Go home.
I used to love it going on to. I used to, don't know why, but I used to go into work early every single day. Whether I was an early shift or not, I'd be there at 6:15, 6 o'clock, 6:30, letting the night staff go.
Yeah.
Whether I was an early start or not, I didn't care. I'd just be in there early, right? And then I used to play wake up song, so to speak, for all the Unit 14.
Oh, yeah.
Whack it in the CD player. Speakers going out there.
Yeah.
Most of the prisoners hated, I can't even remember what the song was, but I played it on repeat.
What, like a compilation disc?
Yeah. Up to the point that I think a member of staff smashed it in the end because I think they'd had enough of it. But you know what? Even that, vast majority, 99% of the prisoners are like, Mr. Raven's on. Here he is this morning.
Yeah, nice,
and that same old kind of, this is time for you to wake up. I'd bang on the doors and this, that, and the other. For those odd prisoners who didn't know what the routine was, they were new to the unit or whatever, you'd either try and build up that relationship and show them the routine. Yeah. Or they're just those prisoners who are just like not very nice, and you had to kind of make sure that. And again,
going back to that of like, again, some staff maybe looked into it more or less. I did and I didn't, but there was always that thing in the back of your mind that prisoner is in for a certain crime, and how does that relate to how I need to handle him, because he could be a very violent individual.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Or he could be. It's nothing to do with that. He's in for fraud or something, and you're like, well, he's not going to be a physical.
He's not
bother
accustomed
to us necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And if we've got prisoners in there, I remember a particular prisoner who got sentenced to 4 years for arson. His family had been threatened. His mum and dad, his younger sister, younger brother, been threatened for years and years and years from a gang in the area where he lived. And one particular evening, I know this story because we sat down and talked about it, right? And it's a petrol bomb round to the house of this gang, these individuals, meant to throw it at the door to scare them, to kind of say, stay away from my family. Missed, went through the window, set a light to the house.
Wow.
No one was injured, thankfully, but he got 4 years for arson. It's quite a serious, potential threat to life and all the rest of it. That particular individual was trying to protect his family, and so the circumstances in which he was in prison for was different to someone who potentially was gang affiliated, a drug dealer, or in for a GBH, ABH on a regular basis. There was, you knew the circumstances behind particular individuals, and that kind of helped you orientate the conversation or kind of your awareness to that prisoner to say, I need to be a bit careful here because he's got the propensity to be volatile, to be aggressive, and he's got previous for assaulting staff or for running onto the netting or whatever. You needed that background in your head before you opened the door.
Going on the netting.
Yeah, on the netting.
When the shift's about to end, staff will relate, and you're like, I just want to go home. You might have done I can't remember what the main shift was.
A shift.
A shift. And you're like, no, we need to deal with this lad on the netting.
You've done a 12.5 hour, 13 and a quarter, whatever it was, hour shift, and then
or he's flooding the cell. I know a particular lad, I can remember his last name, I won't say it, but just because he was known, he was dotting around from unit to unit, and he was known for disrupting stuff, smashing up cells, not really violent towards staff, but just damage more.
Just what he did.
Yeah,
that's
protesting in that way, and he just let his towels out from under the door one day on unit 14.
And that was a waterfall.
Yeah, and all the other lads are obviously, they're pretty pissed off because the water's going into their cells. They have to get towels. And we got them out the laundry. Laundry orderly come out, we let him out, and he kind of gave extra towels out to try and stop it going under. That was for his protection more, though. Again, do you know what I mean? We were doing him a favour, because if you piss too many people off, good luck when you come out next time on social.
That's what I mean, exactly. And that's the, not self-governance, but, that's the kind of peer-to-peer influence and pressure sometimes that you needed that actually helped the environment that you're working in as well. So
the way you pick the orderlies is like, if they've got respect amongst the lads, then that gives you a level of control, because they're like, I don't want to bang up because of you. I don't want to lose my social because of you. So you better get your shit together.
But you always had to be acutely aware that sometimes with that responsibility of being an orderly, they'll take advantage of that situation and start getting other prisoners in debt, because they would start then dishing it, right, I'm going to lend you tobacco, but you owe me 2-3 times the amount what I've lent you.
Oh yeah, they were good at manipulating.
So you had to be really careful on the manipulation of the orderlies that you had, and quite often than not, you'd end up sacking an orderly. 3 months, 4 months later, you might take him back on again. But then he'd build the status. He would build his status back up again, get himself into trouble and start doing things or start bullying others because they've got a higher status. So all of those intricacies, like we talk about, the bits that you don't see externally on what happens in the prison environment, it's its own own little world, isn't it? Its own little community.
Yeah, definitely.
So even that in itself, you probably had to rotate orderlies, not reasonably regularly. It is a rarity that you had an orderly for a long period of time, right? Just because of nature of the beast, and
exactly,
they got too big for the
boots. They have
boots.
to get their fingers in all the pies and get we'll start to probably wrap it up. Of like, you've covered so much. Yeah, you've covered so much, which is nice. I think we kind of covered some of the solutions there. For me, what I was thinking of is I was really sad at like the lowering of staffing levels. Do you know what I mean? Because I thought that just gave you, it just made it more difficult. You know what I mean? If you've got 5-6 staff to like a wing, that's good. But when you're lowering it more, and we had a lot of that at Parva when it was about to shut, that they lowered it more, and sometimes it was to the point where there was 2 staff on a wing, so therefore you couldn't even run a full regime. You had to limit it, and you got to this whole 23.5 hour bang up, apart from meals and showers and phone calls. They weren't even getting a proper soch, so it wasn't helping the situation.
It's not, and that's not a healthy environment for anyone. When you're in that situation, when the staffing levels are reduced to that point, you could always get away with, and I always thought a healthy number in my head was like 4 staff on a unit. 5 was always amazing. 4 staff plus your SO.
Nice.
on a unit was a wicked number of staff. You could do the full regime. You could do full association, day and night. Whenever needed. Basics, enhanced, standard prisoners. Get your education lists out. Have good gym opportunities, because they love the gym opportunities, so use that as an incentive. Exercise yard, so you're able to run lots of activities. But when you start to reduce a regime, prisoners get bored, prisoners get irritated, they start becoming more truculent and more difficult to manage, because we're not giving them the opportunities like we should be doing, which is education, which is rehabilitation, which is association. We're all humans at the end of the day. And human beings are social. We're social beings, so you still want to socialise with other people. So if you're taking away that opportunity to socialise for prisoners as well, then it makes it a really difficult environment in which to manage. And then the reduced opportunities they then get to come out of the cell, people are going to go crazy like a caged animal, right? You're going to go crazy. You keep someone in a small contained environment for long periods of time. As soon as you get into a bigger environment, you want to run, you want to go, you want to go,
let out that energy as well.
So you got to understand
the
mentality, and then other people will say, which I get, well, they put themselves in that environment in the first place. That's what they deserve, right? There should be 24-hour bang up and screw the prisoners and what have you. But it's very short. It's a very narrow-minded, very short vision. On there as well. You got to look at the bigger picture.
100%.
On there as well. It's not just a containment facility that we were running back in, when we were at Parva. It wasn't just containment. It was every element of prepping them for when they leave prison, prepping them for education, improving their education, increasing, kind of the mental condition. Physical condition in a lot of ways as well. As well. And
having a bit of discipline.
How to
routine.
How to converse with people, and we used to do cell inspections. You remember on a weekend, normally on a Sunday. So those who made an amazing effort, they'll get extra association. That's a be all and end all, right? You used to pick 2 cells per. Say there was 3 landings as an example here. You'll pick two of the best or one of the best per landing. They'll get extra association. So you'd have 2 prisoners in a cell who'd be working for an hour, 2 hours, or however long it was. Would do a cell inspection on a, say, Sunday morning. Would go around with a notepad, would go into the cell, floors clean and tidy, bins, toilets, sink, clean and tidy. The beds had been made beautifully. And it wasn't like the military environment on there as well, but some of the prisoners put in maximum effort to making their cell a really clean, tidy environment. But fundamentally, we did cell inspections for a reason. One, it's a good security aspect. You can see what they've got, what they shouldn't have, or what they do have. Make sure that they're clean and tidy and they're healthy.
Anything that's worrying about
in their environment,
how they're living.
But it taught them life skills. As well, cleaning. The prisoners like 18 to 21 year olds. How many lads, girls, people 18 to 21, or that age group, kind of into the cleaning, into the domestic stuff and all that kind of stuff. We were teaching them life skills. Whether they knew it or not. A cell inspection was a life skill. They made the bed. Half of these prisoners didn't know how to make a bed. didn't know that you needed to clean your toilet, didn't know you needed to clean your sink, didn't know how to serve food to others, prepare, make food for others. You know, all of these different things.
They got given some responsibilities,
Of course there was, there's a lot of responsibilities.
And a lot of growing up.
Cleaning not just their own cells, but cleaning the unit, cleaning the shower room, cleaning this. A cleaning job was a highly respected position as a prisoner. You know, whereas we probably wouldn't see that in the open environment on there as well. So
I know this sounds mad, but I feel like, as well as us looking back and reflecting on all them bad points, but also like the good aspects, that we actually enjoyed our careers. We had a great time, and it was something to be proud of, and
for sure,
the impact we had on certain people. That also, I don't know if they'd admit it a lot, the prisoners, but I think that some of them had a great time in jail as well. As in, not as in having fun.
Not as in party time.
It built their character, and they come out. And for us, I know for me, a result that I would think of being an officer for 7 years was if I never got to see a lad come back. That was a result, because hopefully they've sorted themselves out.
We've done what we want. We've done the rehabilitation's worked. And I don't know, maybe right or wrong here, I felt like there was a higher success rate years back to prisoners less likely to reoffend than probably what there is now. I don't know, there was still a ridiculously high reoffending rate even when we were there, probably 80%. You know?
No, it was a bit demoralising,
But equally, like you just said there, if you'd made a difference to someone, even if it was one individual or might have been a group or even more, then that was something to be proud of. I mean, like I said, I did 11 years, and 10 of those 11, because I didn't enjoy the last year, I'm being totally honest, because so many new regulations, policies, processes, everything was being brought in that reduced our ability to maintain good order and discipline to the level it needed to be, level it was required, that was required to make sure it's safe for everyone. And I felt, certainly towards the end, the kind of the focus steered away from that, which inadvertently created a more hostile, more dangerous, in my view, can agree or disagree, but made it a more hostile environment. I started to enjoy it less because I had less ability, less tools, less influence in my position that I held in the prison service in order to maintain the safety levels that I thought it should be accustomed to, or should be at that level. So then, if you're not enjoying it at that particular point, you've got to look at alternative options. And you're not, my option for me personally wasn't trying to take myself away from the units or the shop floor. I think quite, I don't want to say arrogantly, I could have been a governor, could have worked, through the ranks as other people have, which is great. But I felt like there was a bit of a demise to the service or to the quality that we were offering, and it didn't feel, for me personally, that it was the route for me anymore, which is a shame, because I always thought this is going to be me, long term for life, and maybe 11 years is a long term to a degree.
In that time, I think it was,
But then, you got people, I've done 20, 30 years, which I commend and take my hat off to. I think it's absolutely amazing. Because we've got some great prison environments out there still, and some great, amazing staff who have been in for much longer than I have. And probably people are saying, well, what do you know? You're only in for a short period of time in relation to themselves. The time that we were in was a significant time. It felt like a significant time where everything was, or a lot of things worked extremely well. And it tailed off towards the end. But then I look at myself now, and everyone always says this, the grass is greener on the other side. I've left the prison service. I've never been happier, and I'm doing this, and this now, and probably a bit of pride kicks in. I'll always reflect back. That was one of the positions I held very dear and absolutely loved being in the prison service. Equally, and more happy doing what I do now. Because I can look back and have fond memories of the prison service. Mentally, I've moved on and managed to forge a career in completely different sectors and a different environment now.
I was the same.
That I'm really happy with. And I think that's great for your family, great for your friends, great for me mentally, great for me socially,
to move
on there as well. And, I couldn't be happier. I've also got an awful lot of friends who are in the prison service who are catch up with and meet up with regularly,
Yeah.
both in and out of the prison service, who have been in the prison service, mags, and other people who are cool, who will catch up with now regularly, and we always talk with great fondness of the time that we're in, and some great stories that, some funny stories that, incidents and whatever that happened, but, I've evolved and moved on, you've evolved, people do evolve and move on and go on to have great successful careers and doing things that makes them happy now. And I think that's important. That's for me, I always said to myself and true to myself that if I'm doing something I don't enjoy, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to hold myself to ransom. Because it's easy to do that in the prison service. Pretty good wages. People would disagree nowadays, but good salary, good pension, job for life, and all the rest of it. And
it's not going anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
And
stable.
I always remember speaking to a member of staff, and I won't name names, and he'd been in an awful long period of time. What miserable fuck, pardon my language. I might edit that bit. And I said to him, I'd only been in 2 or 3 or 4 years, loving life, loved the job, and I was like, "You're proper miserable all the time. Why don't you just get another job?" And his words to the effect was, "What the fuck can I do? I've got my pension. I've been in 20 odd years. It's not that straightforward and simple." I'm just like that. In my view, my head, personal view, that's pathetic. That's pathetic.
I'm with you.
I did the time that I did, loved it. Could have stayed in longer, but I wasn't fulfilled or enriched, me personally. So I needed to find something and start to do something that I felt good about again.
Nice.
And that's what you got to do. And I'll do exactly the same, now. I love the job that I do now. If I didn't love the job that I do now, I'd move.
Nice.
I've got the confidence now as I'm older that it doesn't scare me, it doesn't worry me, it doesn't concern me. That I've got the confidence in myself that if this doesn't work out, and I know touch wood it will, but if it doesn't work out, I will move on to something that I do find fulfilling.
Nice.
There you go.
Well, you kind of covered my last point there, because I was going to say, when you look back on your career, how do you see it? What did it kind of, your feelings towards it? But you've said that you had that time,
highlights,
you loved it, but you also equally knew when to get out, kind of thing for yourself.
The time was right for me to leave when I left. That was the right time for me, and I think that was the start of the end for a lot of people, right? I feel like I'm right in saying that quite a lot of people decided around that kind of time and period. People with great experience, yourself, with the great staff were leaving, and there's a reason why people were leaving at that particular point. Because they didn't like the direction in which the service was going.
And we felt like we couldn't talk to someone about it. We weren't getting listened to. It was already decided. And like I say, I'm not saying anything bad against the government level or whatever. Well, I am. That it weren't being dealt with, the problems. So therefore, we just felt we had to exit. That was a sad thing, because some of these careers could have carried on. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. There's a potential that if it continued in my view, the right direction or the right way, that you and I potentially could still be in prison service and still enjoying that environment and whatever career that took us within the prison service to evolve as individuals, or some people are happy in the position forever. Got officers who've done 20, 30 years as an officer and absolutely love it, or they might not love it, but they've stuck it.
They've stuck it out
for whatever reason. Nice. I'll always look back and say that was a great time of my life, great career. I talk about it with pride and with great fond memories, but that ended for me personally at pretty much the 10-year point. And the following year was basically giving myself opportunity and time to set myself up and prepare for what my next career life was, or my phase of my career was. That made sure that both work environment and home environment was a good place.
Nice. So, looking after yourself, I like that. Well, thanks for your time, Ray.
Pleasure.
The only thing I want to say is obviously shout out to the Glen Parva staff.
Love all the GP staff.
I've worked with myself and Rave, and it was a great time. often forgotten service, as we know, because it's behind closed doors. It's not in the public's mind. But yeah, if you could leave some comments about what Rave said, mainly.
I mean, I'm in the old guard Parva group as well, and
Nice.
some great people in there, Pin and others. You know, some amazing people who I love dearly in that group as well. Again, this is my experience, my perspective. I don't expect anyone to agree, disagree, or whatever, or take the piss. I guarantee they'll hack it, or other people have some random comments on there myself, maybe gym related. No, I haven't lost size or weight. If anyone goes down that route, I still train.
It's the camera.
Yeah, it's a camera. Yeah, it's took stones off me, pounds off me. But yeah, it was great time, and I've still got that family connection and love to the Parva crew.
Yeah. Any thoughts and comments, like I say, about your own experiences? Just put them down below. And
sure.
Ray, for sure. I like working with you, man.
It's been fun. It's been fun chatting about it, reminiscing on vast majority of the good times that we had on. And I love talking about it.
Yeah.
So you might think, I don't know, whatever, but it was good fun. Good fun chatting today about it. And
Definitely.
we connected and did this.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you. And that's the end of this episode. I'll see you next time on The Human Experience.